Hi, in this lesson we're going to continue creating some sample materials just to keep covering everything we've done. So if we open scenes 10 begin, we'll see a very similar setup of the one we've been using, except this time we have a cube. And the shader I want to quickly show you how to create will be that of an ice cube or yeah, something like an ice. So I'm going to go ahead, open my Hypershade. Let me make this smaller. There we go. And I'm going to create a blend material. We will be using tons of blend materials in this series of lessons and call this ice cube blend. There we go. And the first thing we're going to do is create a normal material, which will do our frozen ice or like our first layer. So I'm just going to call it frozen ice. And this time, before we start going into sampler info nodes and things like that, we will create a very simple procedural texture that will help us throughout the entire shader network. So for that, I'm going to go to my 3D textures, bring a marble. Let me put it over here. I just want to have a little bit more space, and I'm going to bring a solid fractal. Bring this guy here. So I'm going to connect my frozen ice to my blend just as the base material, and I'm going to assign it to my cube. And before we start assigning these where they're going to be, I'm just going to connect them to the diffuse of my first layer just so we can have like an actual render of what that procedural texture is doing. We're going to do some basic little changes. I'm going to change this reddish color to black because I'm only going to be interested in the black and white information. I'm going to make my vein width a little bit smaller, something like maybe 0.05 or 0.03. Let's see 0.04 what it does. I'm going to lower my diffusion a tiny bit, maybe in half, leave my contrast where it is, and just quickly render and see how it's looking. Let's make this smaller just so we can see what's going on and we have enough windows for all of them. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, but one thing I'm going to do before just changing everything is that I'm going to change my place 3D texture so it's bigger. I'm just going to double the size. I want those veins to be a tiny bit bigger and not have so many, and without having to deal with all the procedural values, just by changing the place 3D texture, that should give us a quick, let me just cancel this. I just want to pay attention to this phase. Okay, so this actually looks very good for what I have in mind. I'll show you guys later what I have in mind, but this looks pretty good. I could even go a tiny bit bigger, but we can change that later, or when you guys are working at home, you can always decide if you want more or less of these cracks or whatever we want to use. With the contrast, if we lower the contrast, we can have a little bit more of these black dots over here. But that seems to be working okay. I'm going to bring back this to 0.5. Now I have this solid fractal. If I come and I just plug my solid fractal again to my diffuse, just to see what it's doing, usually the default values will work for what I have in mind. Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted, just this kind of like procedural noise, and this is working really good. So the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to combine these two textures with a layer texture. So I'm going to click out and just look for my layer texture. Here it is. I'm going to, let me move this, bring my marble, my solid fractal. I'm going to get rid of this first one. It doesn't really matter the order because I'm going to do multiplication. There we go. So I can bring this now to my diffuse color and see what this is looking like. So this is, I just wanted to combine those two textures. This looks really good. Again, we could then maybe change the scale or some of the placement in a little bit later. This is just for an example. So when you guys are working on a specific scene, you might want to change the placement to fit your specific scene, but this works really well. So now that I know that my texture is working the way I wanted it to work, we can start plugging these values to the desired parameter. So I'm going to move all this to the side, and I'm going to bring a bunch of remap value nodes. The remap value node, it's an extremely useful node because you can take, in this case, we're only paying attention to the black and white. So I can take that black and white information and I can change it the way I want it. I can adjust the curves, or I can adjust the input and the output, do like a color correction, things like that. So I'm going to plug this guy here. I'm going to change any of my colors, maybe the red, to the input value. I'm going to break this connection because we don't really want this anymore. Let me switch this to like a gray so we see something. And this first remap node, what we're going to do is that we're going to make this cube refractive, but we're going to change its glossiness based on this procedural texture. So I want some parts to be like have a glossiness of 1, so the refraction rays have they're not getting distorted. But then I want to have some parts where those refraction rays are getting distorted. And the easiest way to do that is that usually on our remap nodes, we were always using this curve. We're not going to use this curve anymore. We're going to use the input and output ranges. And what this is going to do is that this is going to remap whatever is 0 is going to come out as 0, whatever is 1 is going to come out as 1. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to tell it whatever is 0, let it be an out of, I don't know, maybe 0.85, and whatever is 1, let it be 1. That way we're going to have the same noise, but it's going to be contained within values, and in values between 0.85 and 1. And I'm just going to name this because we're going to create a lot of this. So this is going to be remap refract glossy, and I'm going to connect my output value to my refraction glossiness. So out value, refraction glossiness. There we go. Now to see this, I just need to make this refractive. Let's re-render, and we can see now what's going on. It's a pretty simple refraction. I haven't changed the index of refraction or anything like that, but we have some parts where we have glossy refractions, and we have some parts where we have like pure undistorted refractions. And I really want to use this to be able to like get that effect where not all the light is coming through something very clean like a glass, because on a nice you're going to have parts with different refraction levels. The next thing I want to do is not have one set specific index of refraction, but I want to be able to change between those parts that are frozen eyes and those parts that are almost melting. So I'm going to duplicate this with my connection, edit, duplicate with the connection, and I'm going to rename this guy remap refract IR. I think here I have the word remap twice. There we go. And here what I'm going to do is that change again my output values, but I want it to be somewhere between maybe 1.3 and 1.4. Think that the index of refraction of water and frozen clean ice, it's somewhere around 1.31. So I wanted to change between 131 and maybe some areas where we're going to have a little bit more of that change of rate direction. So maybe 1.31 and 1.41, something like that. Plug it to my out value, come down and look for this refraction IR. There we go. And let's render again to see what it looks like. So this is my render. We changed the overall IOR. Now it's somewhere between 1.3 and 1.4. Before we changed it, it was 1.6. So we can see it has a little bit less distortion in the rays. And it's very hard to tell, but we're actually getting some parts where we're getting more change of ray direction than in others. And that very subtle changes, it's going to give a lot of realism. So let's continue with this. Maybe I want to create another one where not my entire surface is 100% refractive, but that refraction varies maybe from 0.9 to 1. So we have some areas that are completely refractive and some areas that are not. So again, we're going to continue doing this with the remap nodes. Just duplicate this, call this guy refract amount. There we go. And change this from maybe 0.9 to 1. Plug it to my refraction amount, out value, refraction color amount, re-render. Okay, so there we go. We have some areas that are more refractive than others. We can start to see these kind of patches here, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm going to pause this video here, and we're going to continue on the next video just so I don't go over 10 minutes. We're going to continue working on this ice shader just to show you different ways to create like more complex shaders. So I'm just going to save it right away as 11 begins so we can continue working on the next video.